The electrician was looking at our smoke detectors and he's like, yeah, well, these are like 13 years old at this point also. So it's possible that they may just like not be great anyway. So probably be good to swap them out. And I was like, oh yeah, I assume like the smoke detectors have really improved a lot since then. So and he's like, no, this is still the best model.
What?
I was like, so what, like our smoke detectors and printers, that's just, we've taken it as far as it can possibly go.
Don't give them ideas. Subscription service for your smoke detectors to
your smoke detectors out of magenta ink. So Butterscotch. Hey everybody, welcome to episode 440 of Coffee with Butterscotch, the game dev comedy podcast of Butterscotch Shenanigans. I'm Seth and I'm the games programmer.
I'm Adam and I'm the chief infraction officer.
I'm Sam and I'm the artist. I'm thrown off, Adam. You sent me for a loop. Infraction officer.
Infraction. I don't even know if that's a word, but that's my job though. Infraction.
Infraction or enfraction?
I mean, it's the CEO, so it's infraction.
I still am not quite sure what that means.
I mean, I don't know that it's a word necessarily, but I think it gets across a particular vibe.
It does.
It certainly does.
And the thing is, the CEO role vibes top to bottom.
Yeah. The vibe is I know more than you. That's the only vibe you need.
So if you're confused, exactly. If you're confused, that's on you. And my job is to sow confusion and dissension among the ranks and then walk away with a big fat paycheck.
Walk away with money. Well, anyway, this is a show where we talk about life, business, and working in the games industry. And today is November 3rd, 20 Jubilee. And before we keep going, we have a profanity warning. Profanity warning.
Before we keep going.
I was going to say before we get started, but I was like, we were already deep in it, just.
That ship sailed.
Also, we'd like to thank our recurring supporters over at moneygrab.bscotch.net. Thank you so much for your monthly donations to help keep the podcast going. All right, so we're entering into a wacky phase of life, which is called the holidays. We got winter break coming up. We got Thanksgiving break coming up. So we're going to be recording. We're going to do a couple of double sessions. Mm-hmm. So we're going to record 2 episodes today, which means we'll have some stuff to talk about, news-wise today, or like for this episode, but then it's just questions, just taking questions. So buckle up. Here we go. So what I want to talk about,
what you got?
As far as what's going on in life, I had a cursed day on Tuesday this week. Sometimes
AKA Halloween.
On Halloween. So we've had a suspicion in the studio that October, isn't just the spookiest month because of Halloween, but in our professional history, a lot of things always end up happening in October. October turns into just a sweaty, everything's on fire, nothing is going according to plan, and everything's happening all at once kind of a month. Okay. And we've worked really hard to try to stop that from happening over the years. I mean,
frankly, October is probably mostly responsible for all of our DevOps transformations because we were like, we can't suffer through this cursed month again and again and again.
Yeah.
And I think last year was pretty good. I think last year I think we skipped by October mostly and just had October and November, if I recall correctly. Like got a little out of hand in November, but it wasn't too bad. And this time we got all the way to the last day of October. And it was smooth sailing until that moment.
And then October emerged from the bog, covered in bullshit, and looked us dead in the eyes and it was like, hold my beer. So basically, the night before Halloween, on All Hallows Eve. Wait, is Halloween All Hallows Eve?
Could be.
Is that on the eve before Halloween? My wife and I are in bed, sleeping. It is 2:00 in the morning, and suddenly, beep. We hear beep. A high-pitched chirp from an indeterminate location somewhere in the house.
The wail of a banshee or a fire alarm / detector?
It is a smoke detector. And the way the smoke detectors are designed, when their battery gets low, they will beep for 1 microsecond every minute on the minute in a pitch that is, it's extremely loud, but also so high.
It's designed to be unignorable.
It's unignorable, but also unlocatable.
Yeah, which I've never figured out. Who Again, who is designing this? Because you cannot, on purpose, find the smoke detector that is making that fucking noise. There's just no way.
You simply cannot find it. Okay. Now, this is exacerbated by the fact that smoke detectors will beep when their battery reaches a critically low threshold. Okay. The throughput of batteries is also related to the temperature of the battery. If the battery is cold, its throughput goes down, and if it's warm, it goes up. We're coming into winter, so our batteries were like fine in the smoke detector, or like, they were verging on low. But as it gets colder in the house, around 2 o'clock in the morning, the battery, which is actually normally fine.
It always happens at night? Because I feel like it always happens at night.
Yep. This is why it happens at night. And it's also why they actually never beep every minute on the minute, because the temperature in your house fluctuates, especially when you're looking for a smoke detector and running around your house stirring up all the air, which means like
when you get up, heat all over stuff.
Yeah, you get up, you're looking around and stuff, and then like you may not hear it beep for 10 minutes, and you're like, I guess it's done. And then you go to bed.
It's never done.
And then the house starts cooling down, and then beep. Right? And so it creates this fucked up like sleep deprivation torture scenario where there's something that just randomly beeping. You can't stop it. You can't find it. And you can't I put on noise canceling headphones. It doesn't work because they cancel consistent noises. And this is just a high pitched beep. And it's so loud that it pierces. It pierces everything.
Pierces the walls. That's why you can't tell where the fuck it is.
By design, right? Because it's meant to be a thing where no matter where you are in the house, the sound gets to you. So you can be like, oh shit, the house is on fire.
Which is cool. But it seems weird that there's not a follow up to that design, which is like, hey, we've alerted you that one of your smoke alarms, because that's all you can tell. Yet you don't know which one.
The one.
For example, a button on it where if you press the button, then if the battery is low, then the button would do something or not do something.
Or a little LED. Those cost almost nothing.
People love putting LEDs and shit too.
Yeah, well, it has an LED, but again, like it thinks that the battery is fine most of the time because of this
It's actually because they don't go into a new state where it's like, I'm now in a low battery state, and it's like a toggle is flipped.
Right.
It's a constant.
Right.
So once it hits the edge of the state, it's moving in and out of it, then it becomes impossible to get enough consistency to actually do anything.
So we didn't know about this temperature. We didn't know about this temperature thing. All we knew at that time was we were fucking tired. The dogs are freaking out. Well, actually, one of the dogs. The other dog doesn't give a shit, but one of the dogs is freaking out, thinking that I don't know. Maybe there's a terrorist attack. Maybe there's Armageddon, aliens. It could be anything, But it's definitely going to kill us all. That's whatever it is. It's murder. Coming in the form of a infrequent, tiny, high-pitched beep.
I mean, she was not wrong.
Not wrong. Okay. So we spend much of the night trying to discern the source of this beep, despite the fact that it is beeping anywhere between every minute to 10 minutes. And we have 6 smoke detectors, but many of them are very close together, actually. They're in like clusters, kind of, like in the ends of hallways and stuff like that. And we could not find it. Literally couldn't figure out. And we took the batteries out of smoke detectors and removed them and stuff, and the beeping continued. We just could not stop it. Okay. So then, about 7 o'clock in the morning, it just stops on its own.
That's getting nice and warm.
After we had after we had removed a bunch of the smoke detectors and taken their batteries out, and we're like, can we just kill them? Can we just put them into a bag and throw them in a river or something? So a lot of them were just fully disabled, but the beeping kept going. So that at 7 o'clock in the morning stopped, and we're like, oh, I guess it's done now. So we went on with our day, and we were starting to figure out okay, it was a super busy day also on Tuesday, and so didn't really have, neither of us had time to go get new batteries. We didn't have any of that stuff. So we're hopefully it's done now because we killed them and we can sleep.
Cut off the head of the zombie,
Yeah.
Seems like you took care.
So this is coming into Tuesday, sleep deprived as fuck, and start working. And then first thing in the morning, I get a bug report from Sam. Hey, I'm getting this crash. In the game changer. And it's just it's actually something that's been there for a few weeks, but just by chance, just nobody's stumbled across it yet. But now suddenly it's a blocker because there's a thing Sam's trying to do, and that's there, right? So I'm all right, no problem. So my first thing of the day, I had some plans, but it's got to fix this crash. Start fixing the crash. While I'm fixing the crash, I got another ticket from Sam where he's like, there's this other thing going on in a game changer that is also it's not a crash, but it's blocking me. And again, like the code for that stuff has just been the same for months. And then suddenly it's fucked up. Some edge case has occurred and now Sam can't do stuff anymore. So I fixed the crash and then I fixed this other bug. And that's a big chunk of my morning. And then finally, could start working on the plan, the stuff that I was planning on doing.
And I will say, this is already unusual. Like, if I start my work day, because I start a little bit earlier than everybody else, be on the East Coast, and then I typically just wake up pretty early now with the baby and stuff. So it's very unusual that even that on any day, basically, that I hit a game changer crash of some sort or like a true blocker. Like, it hasn't happened in a very long time. Yeah. So again, 2 of them in one morning was definitely fucking weird.
In unchanged systems.
Unchanged systems, yeah.
And like having things crash, interrupting development is something that used to happen nonstop, and that was where like all of my programming time went. But I feel like we've gotten away from those days, but apparently October said,
hell no.
Fuck you, buddy. I don't think so.
Get back here.
So spent the morning just kind of fixing these blockers and stuff. Start working on my plan for the day, but run out of time, break for lunch, and come back. And then we come back. Sam and Jen start working on the campaign. Jen opens up her world map and it crashes. The game crashes. I'm like, what the fuck? Because we've been working on the world map stuff for weeks and everything's been fine. So I look into it and there's just like a chunk of data that's just not in her map file. And we're trying to merge the maps and that data, it just somehow isn't there. I look through all the code and there's no scenario where that gets skipped. There's just
where the fuck did this
I'm like, how did this even happen? But more importantly, we got to stop this crash. So I start working on fixing the crash. So Jen can't work on the campaign map. So she's like, no problem. I'll just go do some game changer stuff while you're fixing that crash. Okay. Spooky. Okay. So I'm over here working on the crash. And she and Sam are working on stuff in the game changer. And then they go to commit. So the way that it works when we make changes in the game changer is
take a snapshot of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's a snapshot of all the game's data. And then we upload it to our server, much like how you upload a level head level or whatever. So she and Sam are working on stuff and they start to upload their changes. And to this day, we still don't know what went wrong. But what we do know, we don't know why this happened, which we're still working on. But what did happen is that Jen started uploading the file to the server. The server sent a message back to her saying, I got it. I got the upload. You're good to go.
And it's stored because the way that these are stored is there's like metadata. So it's like the name of the thing.
Information about the file.
Stats about it, information about the file. So there's that gets stored in a database. And then there's the actual like content itself that then gets stored basically as a file in a separate location. And so the first thing knows about the second thing, right? But the way it's supposed to work is that the server is supposed to be like,
you get both.
I get all the things and then I'm keeping track of like, oh, I uploaded this. I successfully uploaded the body. Now I can also upload the meta. It's supposed to go in that order so that if something goes wrong, we know that it went wrong, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But instead,
So instead,
we ended up with the metadata, but not the data.
A head with no body.
Which is not supposed to be possible.
Because while the server was writing the file, it died. The server just fucking died for no reason.
Which it's not supposed to do.
It's not supposed to do that. That's not a thing.
And also, I looked through like all the logs and stuff. There's like no
errors.
I can see that it restarted at that same time, basically, right? But there's no log information anywhere about why.
Why did that happen?
It's also supposed to do it really smoothly, where if it has to restart for some reason, it's supposed to basically like wait until all the current connections close, transition to a new copy of the server.
There's a lot of safety
all of this
switches.
stuff, right?
So basically, Jen sends a body up to the server. The server decapitates it, and then it's like,
just
I don't know
keeps
what
the
happened,
head.
man. I don't know.
Now, even worse. So then, because the server gave an affirmative response, it says, "I got the file. You're good." In other words, your changes have been uploaded and they are safe. When the server says that, then we clear your local changes because we don't need them anymore. The server has them, except it didn't. So we deleted her work that she just uploaded, and then Sam and Jen both got stuck trying to load into the game, because the game was trying to download the latest game changer file, which the server said it had.
And sends back the metadata for.
And it sends back the information about it. But then when you ask to download it, the server says, no, that doesn't exist. That file isn't there, right? So we got stuck in this loop, which is like, this is a situation that we never accounted for, where the server just says it has a file, but then won't give it to you. Right? And so there was no logic in the game to let you proceed if that happened. So Sam and Jen are both stuck, and they can't even open the game now. So then Adam and I go on this archaeological expedition trying to figure out what the fuck happened on the server. And eventually we have to just delete the metadata that got uploaded because the file isn't even there. So there's no file to delete, right? So we basically had to just nuke that. So we get them unstuck there. I go back to working on fixing the previous crash that I was working on. So then I get that resolved. And then we start to merge, like Jen gets to actually start working on it. We merge things together. And then we find this just absolutely fucking wild scenario that has occurred in the world map because of an edge case bug that only expressed itself like once. And nobody really noticed that it was there, but it's been there for months. So it's kind of this. Can I explain it, or is it too stupid?
You got to explain it in ghost. It's in ghost terms again, which I think is basically that when someone else, so not you, if you're making some changes to the world map, and then someone else adds a certain kind of thing to the world map, right? Mm-hmm. And then you get that from them. Instead of taking what they have, you say, actually, I have decided that there's nothingness there. I'm saving void into the world, and so I'm going to clobber this.
Well, it's not even that. It's this. Yeah, so it's this kind of weird thing where we have this thing in the game called scenes, which it's a location that you can change over time. So scenes have phases. So if you want a character to move from one place to another,
they have to be.
Then so you would declare those the start point and the end point to be parts of a scene. And then in one phase, the character's in one spot. And then the next phase, the character's in the other spot. So basically there was this edge case bug that would allow you to have something move around in a scene phase by phase. But then you could remove parts of the scene without actually removing the character from the scene through this kind of weird series of steps that you could do that I kind of hadn't predicted. Which would mean that in some cases, that character would end up in places in the world that claims that it belongs to the scene, but the place that it's in isn't actually part of the scene.
Again, man, it's just ghost shit. It's like, you're not supposed to be here, okay?
You're not supposed to be here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're saying that you belong in this scene, but you aren't in the scene.
The character has stepped into a pocket dimension.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so it's possible that we've had this happened several times, but we just never detected it until now because of some safety tools, like safety catches that I added to check for things like that. But it happened. We detected it on Halloween right after, in the middle of all this other bullshit. And so then we had to try to figure out what does this mean? How do we deal with this? How do we fix it? And so basically, once again, there was no fix for what had already happened, which meant that work got lost and had to be redone because things were basically detached.
Yeah, the story of Halloween from Jen's side was that
I kept doing stuff and then it kept getting deleted. Yeah. So and then of course, in the evening, we had the smoke detectors decided, fuck you, and just started beeping again, even though they were no batteries. They were off the ceiling. They had been out for a whole day. And the beeping, and this is the spookiest part. We had the smoke detectors detached. So they were wrapped up in blankets in a different room of the house, blah, blah, blah. The beeping kept coming from the ceiling where they had previously been mounted.
Some real spooky beeps.
And I'm there's nothing up there though. It's just a plastic circle and then some wires, right? But we kept hearing it, and I'm am I stupid? Do I not understand how smoke detectors work? It's a fucking circle with a beeper in it.
Yeah, seems straightforward.
And so now I've sleep deprived for 2 days. I don't know what the fuck is going on. Now we're into November. We call an electrician. He comes, he looks, and he's like, "Yeah, man, there's just wires up there. I don't know what to tell you." And then he couldn't get the smoke detectors to beep.
Of course, he's there during the day.
You know,
Spooky shit only happens at night.
He's there. Yeah. And so he's like, if I were you, I would get all new batteries for all the smoke detectors, but actually I would just replace all of them too. Just full on.
Just burn it down.
Yeah. And I was like, so if it keeps beeping after that, we have to move, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah.
You have to burn the house down, I think, at that point.
Yep. Burn some sage or something, you know?
I thought he actually fixed. I didn't realize that there's still just this question mark there about what's going on in that ceiling.
Nobody know. I mean, he looked through and he's like, yeah, it's just wires. and he even went like into the attic to see if there was like some additional like smoke detector up there or something. And he's like, no, there's nothing up there. It's just wood and a couple of wires.
How many nights has it now been of no beeps?
2.
2 nights. Okay.
Yeah. So I think we're in the clear. But actually I left out some other shit that also went wrong because, you know, we only have so much time. Mm-hmm. But and my head started bleeding. I go to bed at night and there's a cut on my head. I at no point did I bang my head on anything or cut it shaving, and it's kind of a fresh cut too. This was also in Halloween. Just suddenly my head's bleeding.
I don't know, man. That sounds like some spooky poltergeist shit.
There is some spooky shit going on, and I didn't like it.
I know what happened. The beep was coming from inside your skull.
It had to get out. Yeah, it got out.
Something reached in there and pulled it out because it knew you were on the case and that you had cleared every possible option for what it could be. So the only remaining thing was that it was coming from inside the head, right?
Yeah, probably they turned on the 5G towers, and then that pulled the microchip out of my head.
Yeah, Bill Gates was like, "Oh, there he is."
Bill Gates, like he's onto us. He's looking into the smoke detectors. We bugged them all, and he's gonna find it. Mm-hmm. We gotta bleed his head out. So that was Halloween, and again, like it. I kind of took heart in it because it said it meant something to me that all these things went wrong. Yeah. It was something positive actually, which was that
October he completed the ritual.
No, not even that. It was all these crashes and weird things were happening as edge cases in developer tools that I had made for Sam, Jen, and myself to do, you know, all these different things. And we hit so many edge case bugs and so many weird things all in one day, which tells me, hey, people are doing stuff. Like people are really using the shit out of these tools that I made.
Yeah, they're finding. It's like when you get weird ass reports from players once a game goes out and it's being played by thousands or hundreds of thousands of people or whatever, and you just start seeing like weird shit where you're like, the fuck, right? Who would do this?
Yeah. But then it's kind of like, I mean, that's cool though.
That's cool that there's enough people playing it that somebody did this weird ass thing.
Yeah. So true. You know, you can choose to look at it in a few different ways. When you're extremely tired, there's only one way to look at it, which is kill me, please let me sleep forever. But then after that, you know, you can look back and be like, you know, it's okay. It's good.
I think you took it in stride because I think what's weird about it is that because it happened on Halloween, there was some latent comedy in it. In all of that bullshit. Like if that was just like a Tuesday in July, that would have been, I feel like, just way more annoying. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's somehow worse.
Because you know it's coming. You know it's October, and like it had been a very calm October.
Well, maybe that's what Halloween is trying to do for us each year. It's like, hey, prepare for this day to be spooky and fucking weird. And then for us, it's been just dropping it. Yeah, it's like, hey, I told you I was coming. Here I am. And it's kind of funny. It's like, oh, Halloween coming back.
Yeah. And like everything was fine in the end. Like got everything fixed. And like these bugs were always there. They just all showed up on Halloween. You know what I mean? So
yeah, I guess
like we were going to hit them and might as well just like derail one whole day and just fix all the bugs.
Yeah, that's the best way
instead
to
of just being interrupted all the time, you know, for the next month.
Thanks, Halloween.
Yeah, I have 2 comments on this. One is the last time I had, it's a rite of passage as an adult once you like have a place and you're in charge of smoke detectors, you know, is at some point those fuckers are going to make you so mad.
And that point is 2:00 in the morning.
It's always 2:00 in the morning. And the last time this happened to me in our place, it was one of those like, I had the same sort of sequence of like, mine wasn't as bad because we don't have as many detectors and it was easy to kind of triangulate, but we have 11-foot ceiling, so I had to go get a ladder and like, you know, fuck. Right? Yep. So it was a whole thing still, and it was the same deal where
you could just use a gun at that point, right?
I mean, that's
the smoke detector off.
But it was the same kind of deal where I was like, then looking into it, and I was like, why is this how it is? You know, and I was like, there has to be a better solution out there to this completely insane archaic way of doing stuff, you know? And that was when I was in a rage, and so I didn't care what the cost was, and I just splurged, you know? And I didn't replace all of them, but I replaced like the main smoke detectors, like the kitchen one and bedroom one and then like another one, you know, with like the fancy smart detectors, the I think they're called, Google's been buying and selling shit, so who knows, but I think it's the Nest ones. And still annoying because even to set this up, because you want to run a test run on it, so you have to like listen to it, you know, but so there's still like annoyance involved with the thing. But once I got it all placed and stuff, I could just open my phone and it'll just like tell me what the charge is, and it'll just send me a fucking email and a text message.
God. And does it tell you which one?
Weeks before it's going to get too low. And it tells you like which one, they have names, right? So you know exactly which one it is.
Like, hey, Jerry in the living room is feeling a little tired.
Yeah, so it'll be like, hey, the battery's starting to run low, so you should replace it sometime in the next 2 weeks before we start giving you shit, you know?
I think there's a design lesson in here, because when someone designing a smoke detector, right, is thinking about what's the point of a smoke detector. It's like, yes, detect smoke and scream about it, and then keep people safe, which means you got to scream when you no longer can detect smoke, right?
Yeah, you got to make sure that you're running. You have to make sure you're running.
All of those things are true. However, what your feature is doing is actually a very rare frequency event for anybody who uses a smoke detector. In other words, most of what someone's experiencing with a smoke detector is just changing the batteries of smoke detectors.
Otherwise, you don't know it's there.
Yep.
Or it going off spuriously because of stuff going on in the kitchen.
Yeah. So what you're saying, Sam, is like if you don't make that part a pleasant experience, then the only experience people have with smoke detector is horrifying.
Yeah. Well, it's wild to me because it's like that is actually the experience that most people throughout their entire lives will have with a smoke detector.
Woke up at 2:00 in the morning, pissed off.
Yes.
And that's
nobody designed for this?
That's why I just replaced them all. Because the other thing about the smart ones is you can just open it up and be like, hey, I'm going to be doing some stuff that's going to make smoke that it's perfectly safe. So I'm just going to pause you for a bit. So it'll just not go off.
Right? You can do it in the app. You can just fucking
you just do it in the app. You can do everything in the app. And so, or you can say like, oh, hey, you're going off, but actually it's fine. Just stop.
Stop it.
You just tell it to stop doing it. And you just do it in the app. You don't have to go explore the house. And you just open it up and it'll be like, look, this one's red. That's because it's going off, you know? So like you're just in bed. You hear a noise and you're like, oh no. And then you just like open it up and like, okay, turn it off and you're done, you know?
Well, and the fucked up thing is like the smoke detectors we have, there's one button on it.
Yeah. It's
just one button.
Yep.
And it's the test button.
Yeah.
Right. And it says on the button, test it weekly.
Yeah.
And when you push that button,
it just screams at you.
Yeah.
Every smoke detector in your house just fucking goes ballistic. And it's like, I think I would actually, if you don't give me ear protection along with the smoke detector, I think that this would be really bad for me, actually. If
it's so fucking weekly.
What I did with those Nests when I got them is so my wife had just bought this big, it's called Jenny's ice cream. It's like fancy ice cream, but it comes in this big like dry ice thing with a big styrofoam container, you know? And I literally just, cause you have to put them on test mode, right? So they go through the test and like make all the noise and stuff, you know? So I just like activated test mode and just put them in the styrofoam container and and then covered them with towels and then like put the lid on the styrofoam container. And I tell you what, that captures the noise.
That's good.
I could barely even hear it.
But it's so crazy to me that, again, like if most of the person's interaction with smoke detectors their whole life is going to be either replacing batteries, hearing chirps, or doing test runs, why is the test run at full volume when you know the person's ears have to be at max 3 feet away from you?
Yeah. You got to really not want to die of fire.
Who designed these? It's just so fucking mean.
If I wasn't so paranoid, like dying in a fire is one of my paranoias, you know? And so
and you sleep on like a second floor, right?
Yeah.
So that's
like,
even worse.
But if I wasn't as paranoid as I am about this, like I can see why people would just be like, fuck this and just like disable all their smoke detectors, right? Because Sam was just like, it's only a bad experience until of course it keeps you from dying in a fire. So
I'm more worried about like my dogs dying in a fire when I'm not home.
Yeah.
That's what I'm worried about.
But the smoke detectors don't help with that unless they're smart detectors, because now you don't have to be at home and you can discover that your house is on fire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, we got an one from ADT that automatically calls the fire department.
Ah, nice.
Right. But like that's one of 7 in the house.
And who knows which one it is, to be honest,
I know because it looks different from the others and requires a 3 volt batteries, which are the same thickness as a AA battery, but like not half the length, but just slightly more than half the length.
Stubby guy, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they're like, if you put two of them together, at first glance, you're like, that's just a AA battery. But then if you put it next to a AA, it's like, it's not the same.
It's like 90%.
And no other thing in the entire universe uses these batteries. And so you can't get them.
Again, I have so many questions. If anybody listening to this designs smoke detectors.
If anybody listening designs smoke detectors, come on over for a little slapping. Come on over to my house and I'll give you a little slapping. Little face.
I'll just scream in their ear.
Yeah, fair exchange.
Just every so often,
my battery was low after being sleep deprived.
I bet.
So why don't a smoke detector designer come on over and I'll scream in your ear between every 1 minute to 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's wild.
Yeah. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I haven't really changed my smoke detector batteries in a while, go look at them right fucking now, see what the batteries are, replace all the batteries, and then buy a backup set of batteries for all of them.
Actually, no, don't do that because by the time you need them, they'll be expired and won't work anymore anyway. And then you'll have replaced them all with shitty batteries, which is going to be even worse because now they're not
beeps come faster.
On the clock to come faster. Who knows what's going to happen? But
that's true.
Make a note though, so you know which ones you're going to need.
But I think it's a good rule of thumb to say, like, if one of your smoke detectors starts beeping, just change all of the batteries because you won't even know which one is beeping.
Yep, that's the only strategy.
Make sure you have enough batteries.
And if you can afford it,
all of them.
Buy a bunch of smart ones because it's so much better.
Yeah.
It's so much more expensive too, though, is the problem. But also so much
and also, like, I get it because, like, smoke detectors need to be super, super cheap so that everybody can have them and they can be everywhere.
Yep.
But somehow, man, they
don't have to also be bad.
They've managed to do so little with.
I have so for my, which I've talked about in the past, I have the bed jet. It's basically an air conditioner for my bed, right? And the remote for it is this just like it's like it's just a little remote, right? That has like a little LED kind of screen, handful of pixels, not a big deal, right? But this fucking thing, it tells me the battery is low basically constantly, but I've had to change the batteries once, I think, and I've had this thing for 3 years, right? Like, I don't know what kind of magic they're using for this thing, but it's got a handful of buttons and then a little interface, and it's again, not like great as an experience, right? But it can give me information. And I can like look at the information and understand what it's telling me. And I have a handful of buttons I can push. And the whole thing like lives on a battery for 1.5 years, right? So like, why is the remote for my bed air conditioner, which is just a fan, that just turns on. Why is that so much more advanced than like the interface you have for this thing that is meant to detect smoke so that you don't die in a fire? These are just there's why
no
is
answer.
It like this?
There's simply no answer. Well, the most fucked up thing to kind of really top this whole thing off was the electrician was looking at our smoke detectors and he's like, "Yeah, well these are like 13 years old at this point, also. So it's possible that they may just like not be great anyway. So probably be good to swap them out." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I assume like the smoke detectors have really improved a lot since then." So and he's like, "No, this is still the best model."
What?
I was like, "Fuck you! Fuck you! Get out of my house! What the hell?" I was like, "So what? Like our smoke detectors and printers? That's just we've taken it as far as it can possibly go."
Don't give them ideas. Subscription service for your smoke detectors to
your smoke detectors out of magenta ink. So, Anyway, all right, let's get into some questions. Or a question, probably.
Let's go.
All right. The question from podcast.bscotch.net comes from Giantmuskrat, who is one of our QA testers, who says, "What happens to the sale of to the sales numbers of Metaphorgasm when you mention it on the podcast?"
How dare you?
Does anything happen?
I guess we'll find out.
We don't need to go into what it is. If you're not a longtime listener, then you might have to just
if you know, you know. If you don't, it's fine. You don't need to worry about it. All I'll say is that once a year, I get usually a single check for about like $3.
Sick.
That's all I'll say about it.
And it's probably because it comes up once a year. So
Yep, that's about right. And then some random person does what you would do. You know, I'm not going to say it. Does what you would do. And then I got to check.
They do the thing that some people do. Same
But
with
that you
$3.
shouldn't do. That you shouldn't even worry about it. And we just got to move on.
yeah.
All right, next question.
And if you don't know what we're talking about and you really want to know, you should head over to our Discord and see if somebody will
No,
tell
you should. You know?
Maybe
That's
maybe
what,
you don't need to do that.
fucking
though.
That's what I think. I don't want to bring it up because then I'll be in trouble, you know. But you know, some fellow podcast listener, not part of our house,
might know.
You know,
Adam, I'm going to ask you.
Sam,
Stop.
you can be mad at it, but it doesn't even matter. You know, it doesn't even matter what happens.
Cease.
Sam's going to be delivering some slappings
Yeah.
pretty soon. All right, next question comes from Challosis, who says, how do you make decisions? Who gets final say? Do you ask each other about every decision?
Philosophically,
it's-
I actually have a talk that I put up. You can find it on our YouTube about
true.
about how to make decisions, but it's like the philosophy of decision making. So that's one aspect of it, but that's not really the question at hand.
What's
Yeah,
the
'cause this
talk
is-
called? Do you remember so they can find it?
I don't remember.
It's in there.
It's
Somewhere.
just
Probably
just go
if
to
you
the
just-
Discord. Somebody knows.
If you Google Butterscotch shenanigans making decisions, probably it'll come up. You know,
Maybe.
Is this the one about thinking? Or is it a
Oh,
different
it's it's called thinking. It's harder than you thought. That's what it is.
It's pretty
one?
good.
Yeah, it's harder than you think.
Pretty dang good. I would say that we operate on, I think we've talked about this a little bit before, for larger scale decisions and frankly in general for stuff. The reality is I think we've come to respect the pipeline a lot. And what I mean by that is the fact that the work that you do in a studio environment gets handed off to someone else, which means that, you know, if you didn't get any input from them whatsoever before you handed that off, then you're likely to have done at least something kind of wrong. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
then it has to go back up the pipe, and that's not how pipes are supposed to work.
Yeah.
You know?
So we have a lot of very, very short chats that are essentially someone bringing their decision in, especially on, at least I'll speak for this on like the content side of, hey, I'm going to go make this thing that works like this. That's basically what it is. It's like a verbal minute-long thing. I'm going to make this thing that looks like this, works like this, whatever.
Actually, there's a prior step, which is here are the 3 things that I think need to happen next.
Yes.
And why?
Which one should I do? Yeah. And then we kind of talk about that. So we kind of like set a direction. Then we'll have an initial sort of chat about like
What does that look
probably
like?
how to do it.
Mhm.
Or and then like Sam was saying, then there's just some kind of check-ins where usually about partway through the process, it's like, okay, here's what we thought it was going to be like. Here's what I've learned so far. So now here's my plan. Does that sound good?
Mhm.
And everybody's like, yeah or no. And then,
And the goal is
then we
really
go from there.
high autonomy, right? Because like we don't want to micromanage for a bunch of reasons. Nobody has a good time when it comes to that kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
And ideally, the people who are doing the work know the most about that thing, so they're in the best place to be making decisions about that thing, right?
I do want to distinguish though between micromanagement and this kind of creative process check-in thing, because I think
Yeah, very different. Yeah,
they're very different, but I think they could look to some the same in the sense that, does that mean every time you go to do something, you got to check with somebody and like get approval? And it's like, I'm not looking for approval for what I'm about to do.
yeah. You're looking for feedback and
Correct.
some additional input about things you might not be aware of when you.
Yes. And so it's a collaborative effort to actually figure out, to make sure that the thing that you're spending your human time on ends up being worthwhile and doesn't create problems, just even back for yourself, you know, at the end of the day. And actually, a really good example.
Because it will.
Yeah, really good examples from earlier this week. We implemented this watcher item into Crashlands 2. And it's a thing that Seth and I talked about. So again, this was like, hey, we want an interactable thing that will appear in the world that essentially just knocks the player back. And there's a certain way to get around this thing, but you got to figure that out, or you got to somehow like turn it off, basically. Some weird kind of a hazard. Doesn't kill you, it just pushes you around, right?
Pushes everything around,
Pushes everything around. And
which is pretty cool.
so Seth went and got basically a gray box version of that up and running, which required answering actually a bunch of questions about a bunch of other things that seem unrelated, and expanding on a couple systems, right? So each time we're kind of checking in. And then he gets that to a point where he's like, all right, this is good. It's good to go. You can put some art on it. Cool. So now I, on my side, autonomously, can essentially just say, I got the idea from him, like, hey, should be kind of like a thing that looks like it's looking at you, I guess. Right? All right. I can figure that out on the art side. So I go do that, make the thing, put it in. the entire time I was working, though, I didn't actually check in because I was pretty sure this time that I knew exactly what this needed to be. Okay.
Yeah,
exactly.
Pretty sure.
Okay. I looked at the specs. I played around with it before I built this thing. I know. So I made this thing that was very solid looking. Okay. Like really fits in the world, fits on the grid in isometric. Because I thought this is going to be a solid object because it's a thing that like pushes you around.
Now, notably, I didn't make it solid when I put the original version.
There's literally a checkbox. It says solid, and Seth had very purposely not checked.
I did not check that box.
Now, I looked at that as a good
as a suggestion.
I didn't check in, being like, hey, I'm thinking about changing this because of the art thing that I want.
Is that fine?
Would that be fine? Because it's a mechanical thing, right? So I go ahead and I put it in, and I finished the whole thing before I put it in because I'm so sure. Okay, I've done this. We've been through this rodeo. Been here for like
it's not your first rodeo.
Come on. Yeah. And so put this thing in, and sure enough, turns out that it needed to not be solid because if it's solid, then when it pushes you, if you're on the wrong side of it, it'll push you into itself where you get stuck, and then it just keeps on pushing you, and now you're trapped.
Because it doesn't. Importantly, it doesn't push you away. It pushes you in a specific direction. It's kind of like the punchers in Levelhead, where it's like they send you a specific direction, right? So imagine if like a puncher somehow punched you toward itself, but it was solid. And now you just are perpetually being infinitely punched and you cannot do anything.
Yep. So what's fun about this is that I recognized, of course, immediately upon putting the fucking art in, because I was like, oh, I just unchecked the box basically while I was putting final art in, if that makes sense. I didn't uncheck the box
as opposed to testing the mechanics of it.
Or even ask it. Yeah. And so again, it's like you're not checking in because you want approval so much as you're checking in to do these little tiny bits of collaboration to make it so the whole process ends up smoother for yourself, for others, so you don't miss and so you don't send stuff backwards up the pipe or create additional work and stuff like that.
I just like to think about it as you're getting a license because like there are people who know things that you may not know, and you can venture. It's kind of, like if you want to drive, you go get your license because people are like, all right, there's some things you need to know about driving. Okay.
Right.
Like, what do these signs mean? And do you go in the right lane or the left lane? Just like little nuances like that. And you could just get on the road and just start going, but you should probably go get your license so that you and other people don't die and cause immense amounts of property damage, right? So it's, it's the same way of as you're about to venture into some space that other people are also involved in. You got to get a license from someone who's in that space who knows things and just make sure that you're on the right track and you're, you know the rules, the contours of the problem. Right?
Yeah, it's like a home inspector. It's the same. Just it's like it can be all this. It can be implemented in a way that sucks.
Yes,
that's true. And like you'll hear about this in like a lot of like especially large legacy corporate environments, right? Where it's like if you want to use a piece of software, it has to go through like 10 teams. It has to go through a legal team and it go through a security team and go through a blah, and then a finance thing, and then 6 months later, then maybe you get a yes and you can download it.
They say no,
and may or maybe not. Yeah, and like that's not good. Like that doesn't make the work better for anybody, actually, right?
Yeah, but that's not a collaborative process. That's just straight up an approval process, either yes or no, right?
Yeah.
So
because oftentimes throughout this, essentially what is decision making here, which is saying, okay, at the highest level, we said, hey, we want a thing like this in the game. Why do we want that? Let's back up another level because we need this particular
agree
kind
on
of
the
exploration,
design principle.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's like we want this particular kind of puzzly exploration thing to be available at certain points. Okay, back down. This thing sounds like a good key to do that, and maybe even one of the few things we need. So let's do that. Okay, now we've got it implemented, but doing that required a bunch of figuring out to make sure that again that it aligns with that top level thing. And then all the way down to once you actually go to put it in the game, is it doing the thing that you thought it was going to do? So I think it's basically this. It's the collaborative aspect of it is I think the thing that makes it feel like it's not. It just doesn't. It doesn't suck because it's someone else is helping you bring the thing. You as a crew are shepherding.
You brought it to them first.
Yeah.
Right. And like if you don't do that, it just comes back and bites you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So nobody's having a good time. Yeah. I think the way that I like to talk about it is as an advocacy thing, right? So that everybody on the team is here as like the owner of a particular domain, which also makes them responsible for being the advocate of that thing, right? And that means a lot of things because also everybody's the advocate for the whole team, right? As in like everyone's main focus still, it's like, it's not about whether you personally want this specific art asset to be in there, right? It's
right.
Because as soon as that starts to be why you're making decisions, then you can't operate successfully as a team. But if you're coming into this advocacy role, then basically the way that we avoid micromanaging and get to focus on the collaborative aspect is we just say everything as much as possible should involve collaboration, but in particular with anybody else who's going to be, as Sam said, having handoffs related to this thing, right? Mm-hmm. Because otherwise you will not make the right thing. You will not do the right work unless you make sure.
It makes you feel bad at the end of the day. Like,
nobody's having a good time. Yeah. And so your job then is to come in as the advocate, not for like the specific thing that you're trying to do, right? But for the overall goal of what you're trying to accomplish. Because if you have that, so like, because
that's where we agree on stuff. That's where we try to really
because you come in and you figure that out first, right? And so like, because I think of myself as like I'm the advocate for really slick processes where if somebody says everything is fine, I still refuse to believe that, right? So like part of my job is like an advocate for always pushing on process and workflows, even to the point where people don't believe it's worthwhile, right? And so that's like the level where I fight people, right? Is because if I'm doing that, then I can cause everything to continue to get better because somebody is advocating for that, right? Sam is always advocating for aspects of the art direction of the game and the overall design of the game, right? Seth's always advocating for making sure that the design choices that we're making don't completely fuck our ability to actually develop and deploy that, right? And we'll have a myriad of things that we are strong advocates for, right? And it's basically and then that's what we encourage the rest of the team to do as well, right? So that's what causes people to go do the work autonomously. That does need to get done, or at least is useful when it gets done, right? Because everybody knows what they're the advocate for, and then
what the point is,
and what we should be trying to accomplish. And so they can come in that role and say, hey, I want to do this, or hey, I think we should do this for these reasons. And then everybody else gets to bring what they advocate for to that same discussion. Yeah. To then collaboratively, given that the overarching goal for all of us is the shared, agreed upon goals for the studio.
Yeah, I think micromanagement it's typically the result of not being able to effectively communicate the higher level goals associated with any one of these things. Because like if you cannot actually communicate what it is you're trying to get out of someone's work or as a team output, then it's not possible to autonomously send people out to go do that thing because they're just going to do some random shit instead. So a lot of people, it's easier to focus on technical bits and bobs, and tell people exactly what to do, line by line. It is way easier to do that because it's so concrete than it is to have enough of these kind of collaborative and conceptual processes in place that the agreement is already there before someone arrives at the lower level of doing the work, such that they're just kind of checking in on this collaborative level to say, hey, this is where this is going. This is what I learned. Yeah. Is there any, does this seem correct? Or, hey, this is actually blown out of scope now because of this fact of a thing in the game, whatever. I think usually that's the result.
Yeah, I think micromanagement is basically one directional, right? It's, hey, I've made all of the decisions about what's to happen. Here they are, right?
And if any new decisions come up, bring them back to me, and I'll tell you what to do, right? Yeah, it's micromanagement is just the opposite of autonomy, and I think a lot of people also kind of confuse autonomy with solitude, which is like you doing your own thing and like being in charge of your own domain. That's autonomy. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that nobody else is ever involved.
Yeah. And that's why I like the reframing it all as advocacy, because advocacy also implies you don't advocate for something to yourself.
By yourself.
Right? And so if we move away from the idea of like ownership and autonomy to advocacy, right? And ownership of a role and then advocacy for that role. And like that's the idea that you focus on. Then that's what gives people the sort of authority to go and actually do stuff autonomously, but while also very strongly implying that they should be involving everybody else in this process as well.
Yeah. Yep. So then, like you're not shipping the whole game yourself. I mean, unless you are, but even so, you're doing this internally,
Yeah.
Well, and it also kind of prevents you from turning into a one-dimensional KPI monster. I had this kind of goofy thing happen this week where it's like in my WoW guild, I do a lot of work with the members of our raid team to kind of help them perform better. And we have this guy who's
a gold star coach.
Yeah. Wow. So one of our guys basically came to me and he's like, I need to figure out how to do more damage. My damage is, I'm just not satisfied with it. And he's like, and what I need you to help me with is I need you to help me decide between whether I should use this pair of gloves or this pair of pants. Okay. And I'm looking at it, and it's just like there's just like a couple of stats.
Actually, let's look at this because this is good. This is someone coming to you with a solution, not the problem, right?
Well, and also it's both because they come together with a problem that they've defined in a very particular way, and then a really specific solution that they have for that problem, and trying to get feedback on just the solution.
So my guess is the first thing you do is you back up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? Is this actually the problem we may be solving?
Yeah. So I was like, before we dig into this
Hell yeah.
pair of gloves question, let's just go back. Let's look at the logs and see what's going on. Mm-hmm. And I look and I'm like, well, whenever we wipe, as in like everybody dies on a boss, you are among the first 2 dead about a quarter of the time.
You know how you
what
do
that
more
tells
damage?
me?
By being alive.
By
not
being
dying.
alive. And I was like,
In fact, this is a good, like, can we not kind of style thing too, right? Because it's actually the most effective way to do more damage is not to do more damage. It's just to not
be
to
around
die.
more.
Straight up. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, you can run sims where you can like simulate a fight with your character and it'll tell you what the damage. And I was like, the gloves, the pants, that's going to be like a 0.5% difference either way.
Yeah. If you live twice as long, that's 2 extra damage, right?
That's twice as much damage, right? And so I was like, don't even worry about any other shit. Let's just look at your defensive usage and look at any items or any things you can change to help you live longer. And so I actually had him swap out a couple of pieces of gear that he really liked, that he thought were like really helping him with his damage in exchange
and they might have been, but only in the moment.
Only while he was
long-term.
alive.
Yep.
Swapped it out for some defensive stuff. And then the next raid night, he was doing 20% more damage and never was among the first 2 dead. There's also a knock-on effect where if you feel safer, then you're not panicking as much and you can pay more attention to your damage rotation, like what buttons you're hitting. If you feel like you're on the verge of death all the time,
you can't.
It's a hard place to optimize.
You can't focus. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so like, you can simulate it using like, if I was a robot pushing all my buttons perfectly, what's the best piece of gear? But that's not what's happening. That's economist thinking.
That's
right?
actually, I think that's another really important point to all this too, is that the other part when it comes to like making decisions and collaborating on this stuff is that you have to treat all people and as individual people as part of the process, and just like work with the fact that like
Work with the quirks.
Yeah, some people are anxious. Some people need things communicated in a certain way to be effective. Some people, like you just figure out kind of what is going on with the person, and then you just work with that, right? So like Seth, in your case, talk about this. Yeah, if you acknowledge the fact that there's a person doing this and a people panic when their video game character is about to die, right?
Yeah, emotions are an extremely important part of what you're doing.
And maybe this person's more risk taking naturally, right? Sounds like it. If they're dying all the fucking time. So giving that person, swapping out a little bit of that offensive power for a little bit more defensive capability.
Well, the thing is, it was a lot of defensive capability. Because the weird thing is that like people think in like I said, one-dimensional KPI. You're like, I'm a damage dealer. My job is to make damage number real big. Mm-hmm. And so, like as a very simple example, you can drink a flask, which just gives you a 30-minute buff. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of different flasks you can choose from that have a range of effects. And you can only have one at a time. So whichever one you choose is, that's important. So one of them gives you a bunch of versatility, which is like plus 4% damage dealt minus 2% damage taken. So it's offensive and defensive. Okay.
Nice.
It's boring, right?
Yeah,
it's just like,
hey, if you want to stay alive, sometimes boring's the best way,
Or alternatively, there's one called the File of Corrupting Rage, where your character
it sounds
gets
really cool.
Your character gets a lot of like crit, like a shitload of crit. So you have a much higher chance to crit. But then once you've taken a certain amount of damage, then you lose the crit for a little while, and instead you take a bunch of damage for a while.
So this is the exact thing. That guy should not be fucking. Yeah, he should not be fucking with that toy.
Yeah.
No.
And so a lot of people will be like, this one is better on the Sims and damage number big, good.
Yes.
Right. Then they drink that fucking thing and then they just die. Right. And it's like, I mean, in a perfect world, And it's also there's a survivorship bias because people look at the top performers and all the top performers are using that.
Yeah, and it's because they're not suffering the downsides of the thing because they're a top performer.
Because they're really, really
I think
good.
Again, it's fixating on a certain part of the pipeline, right? It's like if the pipeline for achieving like a raid boss kill in this case, as your individual damage character, the first rule is simply do not die. The second rule is be close enough to the thing to be able to kill it and hit your buttons fast enough, right? It's like if you get focused on the second one, but you haven't optimized the first one, your bottleneck's over there. You don't need to be worried about pants and boots and stuff. Like just fucking
and people always miss it too because there's 20 people in the group. And by the end of a boss fight can be like 5 to 10 minutes long, depending. And sometimes it's a very close kill, as in like maybe the boss at 5 minutes enrages and kills everybody. And we will kill the boss with like 10 seconds left, right? And people will look at that and they'll be like, our damage was just a bit too low, But what they don't look at is 4 people were dead for half of the fight. It's like, it's not that people weren't like pushing their damage buttons well enough,
or that half the team was dead.
Yeah, it's that they just didn't live, and so it's like you will do more damage and have more offensive power if you stack more defensive power, which is counterintuitive, but
not really.
It makes perfect sense.
Zoom the fuck out. It's not. You can't do damage when you're dead. So
But it feels weird if you're a damage dealer to be like, I'm going to take the thing that doesn't increase my damage on paper. I'm going to take the thing that gives me more health or whatever, know. So like this is something like I'm always pushing on. But
that idea that you described it as like KPI blindness or whatever.
It's tunnel vision,
it's a tunnel vision where because your job as a damage dealer isn't to do the most DPS. It's to have dealt the most damage over
the most damage during the boss fight.
Yeah. And so when you're trying to figure out what makes up total damage dealt during a boss fight, right? You don't, if you just look at DPS or whatever, right? Just how much damage you could possibly do if you were doing damage every second for the entire boss fight, right?
Yep.
Then you're going to come to the wrong conclusion because as Seth, as you're saying, like that's not what actually happens in a boss fight. You don't just do damage every second at your max DPS the whole time through the entire boss fight. That's not what happens. What happens is you die, you panic, you have to help somebody do something. You have to, like stuff is happening and you have to account for all that other stuff as part of it too, right? I think KPI blindness is one of the most important concepts.
It's
in
huge.
Business.
Yeah, I think pipeline awareness is I think the key thing for me when I talk to some other like studio heads and stuff every so often. That's where I ask them those questions about like how is it that work flows and where are these trouble points happening? Are they actually where you think they are?
They never are.
Because they almost never are when you first get started trying to figure this stuff out.
Oh yeah. And even like, in our own past, we talked about how our struggles with like, increasing throughput of art, for example, but without predicting how that was going to affect like the game programming side of things to be able to integrate the art. Right. And it's like all you can really look at is just go like, I just wish we had more art. Like I feel like if we had more art, then we'd have it.
Well, and but again, it's like because the human component, because we're not robots, and there's multiple things going on there too, right? Because also we want to have a better time doing the work, right? And usually the things that make you have a better time also happen to increase throughput, right? So, because it's removing tedium, it's removing work, right? So, which is a lot of why, like what I've always been like advocating for the team is like quality of life for doing the work. Like, because if you do that, you get all these other get all these other things. You just get better throughput. Everybody's having a better time. You get fewer absences. Like everything is better if you're focusing on quality of life. And then it can be less of a problem when someone's throughput becomes so high that they're sort of piling up work for somebody else, right? Because now it's not like, oh, we invested in this and that was the wrong move because we invested in something that wasn't the bottleneck. But instead it's, hey, this person's having a great time. So they're making more stuff that we could deal with, but we could figure that out. That's okay, right? And you can then decide like,
moved, right?
Yes, the bottleneck moved. That's fine. We'll like figure that out, right? But it is that like combo things where it's not as simple either as like identify where the bottleneck is and like address it there.
Yeah.
Which is also how we used to think about it. It's just like
it's like a free body problem, right?
Yeah, there's just a lot going on.
Yeah.
because it's people, right? And so I think just to sum it up, like how I think about this, it's basically ownership of a role, advocacy of that role, right? And then this last thing, which I just completely already lost fled my brain instantly. But the last thing we just talked about, which
KPI blindness.
KPI blindness.
Yeah, zoom out. Think about
zoom out.
Yeah, about how what you are doing integrates with everything else, and if you get hyper fixated on just one dimension of your work or of your output, you might just be actually only making problems for people and minimizing that number. Yeah. Also, right? So,
well, actually, I think one last really clear example of that idea, right, is something we deal with QA, right? Where in QA, it feels like your job is to find and report bugs, right?
Yeah, this is tough.
So it's easy to, if your KPI then is like number of bug reports, right? The problem with that is that how you can only report bugs that exist. So if you have a high number of bug reports, that's on the one hand good for you as that person, because
good that you found them.
It's good that you found them, but it's actually bad. That's a bad KPI for the team, because that means we're producing lots of bugs, right? So because what the actual KPIs that matters is kind of the opposite. It's how few bugs slipped by you, how few bugs that existed, right? Escaped your notice, right? And that's the actual, which is a much harder thing to measure than just how many tickets did I submit, right? And that's
you can't measure it. You can't measure it based on
every good KPI that actually is meaningful is not measurable.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And it can put you at odds, right? Like if you're measuring stuff, like especially in that scenario, if you're getting upset, that like you're not catching bugs because there aren't any bugs, like what do you want somebody to do about that?
Yeah.
Add more bugs. And there's just no way. So.
And it's that good example too of where KPIs fuck things up, right? Because when they don't have nuance, and
which they don't,
and they never do, and more particularly when you're not measuring the thing you really need to be measuring for your KPI, you create all these weird perverse incentives, and it can cause things. And this is like you see this a lot in really big companies where like everything, because things are so big and hard and unwieldy, they just get really obsessed about simple answers. Here's our KPI for this. Here's our KPI for that, right? But when you look at then what happens as a consequence, it's just bad. There's just so much bad stuff happening because people need to do X to get that number up, right?
Yep.
Even though the goal isn't actually that number, right? And so everything that actually is the real goal,
it's a proxy.
Yeah, falls through the cracks.
Yep. So just got to be aware of it. So advocate for your stuff. Don't be blind to KPIs, and take ownership.
Yep.
And that's all the time we have for this week. But we'll be going right into recording the next episode right after this. So, it's going to be wild. We'd like to thank our producers, Fat Bard and Sampa DaCosta, for putting this episode together. And thanks to our community moderators who keep our Discord running. To get more involved in the Butterscotch community, just go to podcast.bscotch.net, where we have links to the Discord, a way for you to donate, and links to the archives. And as always, if you haven't yet, head on over to Steam and give Crashlands 2 a wish list. It helps boost its visibility in the algorithms, which, of course, helps us greatly in the long run, and we'd appreciate it. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.
Bye.